welcome to this edition of EMS Now Up Close. Today, I get to speak once again with Brian O'Leary. Brian, of course, is the global head of e-mobility and infrastructure with Indium Corporation. Brian, it's been quite a while since I last spoke to you, and a lot has happened in your specialty area. So thanks for taking time to come on and in the next few minutes, get us all updated on everything that's happening in the world of EV.
Everything that's happening. Okay.
No pressure, right?
Yeah, right. Well,
Yeah,
I think maybe just kind of rip some headlines even from today.
good.
Big news is that the EU has finally had some consensus on tariffs against Chinese automotive makers, meaning those being imported, obviously. So the United States announced in June 100% tariff,
Yeah.
which is pretty amazing. And now Europe is imposing up to 45%. So why? Why are they doing this? Because European and US automotive makers are scared in their boots of Chinese automakers. BYD earlier this year announced their kind of entry level full electric vehicle at $11,500. So how do you compete with something in that range when I think some of the least expensive full battery electric vehicles from US and Europe are still in the mid 20s, but more like around $30,000. So that's less than half the price.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you compete with that?
Yeah.
So what's going to happen? What does that mean for the industry? It means that, if you're going to compete in these markets and as a Chinese automotive maker, you're going to have a footprint in those markets. And there's been talk for some time about BYD setting up a plant in Mexico.
Right.
They're going to hold off until after the election as to the actual site location. But that facility, I just looked it up, is proposed to be about 150,000 units per year. And because it is within Mexico, it's still not known, but there's some assumptions that they might be able to get around the tariffs and import into the United States. Now, will it actually happen? I don't think so anytime soon. I think other barriers will be thrown up, mainly security concerns, like what we saw with Huawei with 5G.
Yep.
I think we're going to see the same thing with electric vehicles because they are so wired with the over-the-air updates.
Mm-hmm.
And already, I know the Biden administration was making some noise about, we are not going to allow that data to go to Beijing, to quote them. So, and I think some of these concerns are actually legitimate.
Mm-hmm.
Because as you see, there's so much getting packed into EVs as far as the technology.
Mm-hmm.
At the Shanghai Auto Show earlier this year, one of the makers had a karaoke system in the cockpit. Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
So if you can do it, they'll do it.
Yeah. Oh my God. But other than with the EU, if I look at what's going on in North America, there seems to have been a mixed bag this year, right? You see a lot of slowing in the demand of EV and you see kind of the rolling back by some of the big makers. But concurrently, I also notice kind of investments being made or being announced. Maybe now in the fourth quarter, they'll slow those a bit. So what's happening here?
So I think it's a convergence of things. One is everybody had a forecast. Well, the market just plainly has become more competitive. So if you add up everybody's forecast, it doesn't add up to the total demand. So you're not going to capture what you thought you were going to capture. So I think that's just a reality. It's just a more competitive market. In addition to that, yes, there has been a slowdown. We've kind of gone through that, early adopter stage. We're now passing on to the next stage. If you wanted to own an EV, you would have bought one already. And what we're kind of entering into are people who are on the fence. I'm not sure if I want to do this. I'm not sure if this makes sense. And we're still grappling, at least here in the United States, with what's being called charge anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
If I go to a charger, is it going to work? And that still is a very real problem. Unless it's a Tesla, you're basically dealing with, third-party kind of hardware from a variety. I mean, there's dozens and dozens of manufacturers making this stuff. And, the history or track record not so great. It still isn't great, but it's being built out. We've known for some time, or the industry has known for some time, that you know the speed at which things are being implemented will not be at the same pace of the vehicles that are coming on the market. So if you're a consumer, if I have a choice between a full electric vehicle or one that's hybrid, and when I say hybrid, it still has a plug, still has a battery, you still charge it, but you have a gasoline engine, then you don't have to worry, oh, does that charger work or is it down? I mean, I'll give an anecdotal example. I live here in Colorado. My daughter owns a Nissan Leaf, and we hit like minus 22 last winter. And she called me in a panic. She went to 5 different charging stations and none of them worked. And it was related to the cold. And her battery, just like your cell phone, if your cell phone gets too cold, the battery, what you thought you had, drops precipitously, right? Well, the
Right.
same thing happened to her vehicle. She had it in a nice warm garage, left work at like 30% charge, and within like a half an hour, she was at 5%.
Jesus.
So you hear stories like that, you go, well, I don't know if I want that.
Yeah.
And if I have a combustion, you know, alternative that
Mhm.
is coupled with a battery that gives me some range, that seems like a pretty good choice right now.
Let me dive into that because I had that conversation just recently with a colleague who was talking about speaking to people in Scandinavia, saying they don't understand why people in the US are having all these problems with cold weather with EVs because they've been dealing with it and it's been working fine. Is that a matter of technology or scope then that with what's going on here, the difference why we're having problems?
Well, I'm gonna speculate a little bit because I don't
Okay.
have the hard numbers on this, and it's a lot of anecdotal type of
Yeah.
conversations you hear. Well, first of all, Scandinavia's population could be one medium-sized city in the United States. I mean, there's
Yeah.
just far fewer vehicles, right? So you, of course, you hear about bad stories, but as a percentage here in the United States, it is relatively low. But you have these events, like what happened in Chicago, also happened here in Colorado, and you just have people that they don't have, let's say, they don't have any kind of habits they built yet to deal with those types of temperatures. Versus Scandinavia, they're used to that. So, from your question about technology, some of the vehicles, or actually quite a few of them, have a feature which warms the battery, so you're not starting literally from a cold start. It turns out that lithium ion batteries are kind of like very close to us. They like 72 degrees. They perform really well at the same temperatures we like. They don't perform well at extreme cold, and they don't perform well at extreme heat. So I think in Scandinavia, a lot of people have just gotten to the habit, keep it in the garage, or if it's outside, I'm going to have a model that has, the ability to warm the battery before I go. But to my other point, I think just as a percentage, you get
Mhm.
2 million, 3 million, I don't know how many vehicles, compared to other markets, it's still percentage-wise pretty small.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I also told my colleague, I said the problem in the US that one time is they were out on the roads and stuck on the roads and the batteries run out. Remember that? And then
Yeah.
people were having problems and that became a safety issue. On the technology front, I didn't, is there a pivot going on? You mentioned the hybrids there. From what's that the kind of the balance, full battery, electric battery to
Right.
hybrid?
Well, it depends on the automotive maker. I mean, they're clearly automotive makers that full battery is all that they offer, like Tesla or Rivian, Lucid, and so forth. And then you have a lot of the legacy guys that are kind of taking the path of doing both because they've got a history of building combustion engines for close to 100 years in some cases. But what you're seeing, let's just use Detroit as an example. What you're seeing is a bit of a pivot. There was a decision, we're going to go full BEV, which is battery electric vehicles at some point, but now they're saying, you know what, we're going to take a kind of a two-pronged approach. We're going to offer both. Um, it from a manufacturing standpoint, it's not great because one model now you have two very different drivetrains. So the same
Mhm.
model of vehicle, might maybe full electric versus electric and combustion, that just adds cost and complexity and so forth. But they're trying to they're trying to meet the market demand that they think is a more realistic pathway. But irrespective of that, there's still in the not too far future where any combustion-based vehicle is going to be prohibited from these manufacturers into those markets like the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Europe, many other markets have said, 2030-ish type of range, 2030, 2032, 2035, you cannot buy any vehicle that has a combustion element to it. So I think you're just kind of putting it off. The thing that really concerns me, I'm an American citizen, of course, I'd like Detroit to be around. I
Yeah.
love some of their vehicles. But I think by taking this pivot is just going to put them further behind the Chinese, because a
Mhm.
lot of the Chinese brands are full electric. I mean, put it in perspective. China right now has over 60% adoption. The whole country,
Mhm.
60% using full electric vehicles. Um, just this year, they hit about 50% of all sales, 50% plus. So 1 out of 2 vehicles is fully electric, while here in the United States, we're still at around 12%. So I think it's, if we could fast forward maybe 5, 10 years from now, I really wonder if, I think, I'm going to speculate, I think Stellantis probably will sell off some brands to stay profitable. I think Ford will continue to focus on trucks. The
Yeah.
Mach-E, though, is doing great. And then I think with GM, they had a really good quarter, by the way. They're like up 60%. So they might, I don't know. I don't know what it's going to look like, but with the Chinese, with they're not slowing down. They didn't get the memo. They are full speed ahead.
That's interesting. Hey, and let's jump into the infrastructure side because that's such a critical piece, and you've touched on it already on the charging stations. And to me, it's the charging stations, and obviously there's grid issues, related issues, and the draw on there that won't come just from EVs, but from other technologies and changes within the economy as well. That's going to be a challenge to have to manage at scale within this country. But starting on the charging station side, Tesla seems to have been the standard, right? I mean, is there's kind of and as I understand it, they opened that up for anybody to use. It was more restrictive. Now it isn't. Is that being adopted as the standard, or what's happening there?
So Tesla does have a standard. It's called NACS. It's the abbreviation North America Charging Standard, I think is what it stands for. Yes, they opened up their proprietary infrastructure.
Yeah.
Now, pretty much anybody can use it. They have some systems that have adapters. So if you don't have the plug, by the way, the socket is different.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you don't have it, the adapter is presented at the station.
Yeah.
But what's also happening is there was a flurry this year of OEMs saying or announcing that, hey, we're going to provide in the future the socket in our vehicle that can plug into the Tesla superchargers or level 2 chargers. So that's a really big deal. And almost all of the majors have agreed to do that. Now, that's just here in the United States. How that's going to roll out in Europe, I'm not real sure. But what's also interesting about Tesla laid off almost their entire group focused on superchargers. And I'll tell you, the industry is a little stupefied as to, well, why did they do that? They're so successful. And from a cost standpoint, too, they're so much cheaper to deploy than their competition. And I'm talking about applying for the government money to build out infrastructure here in the United States. So there's a lot of theories as to why they did that. I think they just decided it's not a big moneymaker for them, and they want to focus on other business units like their robo taxis. So we'll see. But it's also opened the door, certainly for other actors to participate in this market. I was just at a ribbon cutting a couple of weeks ago for a company called Alpatronic, which I'm sure a lot of people maybe not heard of. Very strong in Europe. They've got a network that's pretty close to Tesla's, and their customers basically begged them to come into the U.S. market because of the reliability issue. So that's kind of interesting. So there's still new actors coming into this market because there's absolutely a need. I mean, the need's not going away.
Right. And what about the systems itself, the infrastructure, the charging station infrastructure, how that's rolling out across the country? Do we see?
Not fast enough.
There's the answer, right? That's
Yeah.
just, is it?
There's a government body that NEVI it's called, and they are involved with uh, funding each of the states put in a plan and they get money from the government. It's part of the infrastructure bill. Very few states have actually spent any of that money.
Oh,
And there's a variety of reasons why. Quite frankly, just permitting, digging trenches and all of that, all the different stakeholders involved, the red tape is ridiculous. That's one part of it. The other part of it, frankly, is a lot of departments of transportation for the states are responsible for doing this. DOTs are great at building roads and bridges. I don't know about doing electrical work. So
right.
this is new to them. And the third part is, have you tried to get an electrician to your house anytime recently? Do you know how hard it is?
Yeah.
How expensive? They're busy. They're really busy. So you need the workforce that can do it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, because I've often thought in a simplistic way when they talk about that network, where to put them. It's like, why not have every gas station that pumps gas put an electric charger? It's good business, right? It's just, but are they then restricted then, as you're saying, with the same regulations and restrictions would apply?
Well, like you just said, think about that for a second. When you charge a vehicle, let's say it's a DC fast charger. So that's the high end. In theory, it's supposed to be the quickest, right?
Right.
Still is around a half an hour. Do you go to a gas station today and pump your car for a half an hour? Most gas stations are built on corners where you could not possibly have a queue of cars waiting in line, right?
Yeah.
So that model is, yeah,
Yeah.
unless you're going to a Bucky's like out here where it's,
We
five
got those
football
too.
fields. Yeah,
Right.
five football fields.
Yeah.
You're out in the Northeast. Most gas stations are pretty tiny in terms of their footprint. So what really is kind of evolving is sort of a combination of these DC fast chargers and what they call these corridors that
Mhm.
are strategically placed, mainly along highways. But also the other part of it is what they call convenience charging. So you got to get outside the mindset of gas stations. So if you go to China, for example, you see them everywhere. Wherever you park, there's a charger. It's usually like a level 2. So that's, you're not getting that fast jolt. But if you're having lunch, and most, Chinese citizens will go out for a 2-hour lunch or 90 minutes or something like that, that's a good session to have your vehicle plugged in.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like your iPhone. Your phone's sipping all day. You're plugging it in, you're putting it in this, you're on the plane, you're plugging it in. It's kind of the same concept with EVs.
Okay. And that, and obviously you're talking about that the level to the fast charge versus the slower charge, and that goes to the grid issue too, right? And the draw that it puts on the overall grid and the challenges as technology, whether it be AI they talk about, crypto mining, all of those things, and even the conversion over from to more reusable type or cleaner energy sources. So I don't know to the degree that falls in your bailiwick here, but what do you see
Well,
there?
it sure does actually. So here's the reality. A lot of remote locate. Well, okay, put this in perspective. I'm going to use the United States as an example. We have 3,000 operators of our grid. 3,000. So you and I know the Con Edisons and but there are mom and pops all over the country. So if you're putting in one of these DC fast chargers, let's pick on Kadoka up in the Dakotas, right? You might not have, like you said, the infrastructure. Now, the power may be there, the grid may be there, but that final wiring to the site might not have the amperage. It literally may not have the capability to deliver that amount of energy
Mhm.
that DC fast charger would need. So part of the solution that's coming is to use battery energy storage in tandem with these DC fast chargers. So you could have the infrastructure that's maybe not really there, but it could trickle in that energy, store it into a battery. And that battery is now hooked up to the DC fast charger. So when your EV shows up, boom, it gets it at the speed that it's expected. And on a side note, we were in prep for this talking about trade shows. What's good if you want to learn? I'll tell you, I went to RE Plus. Probably haven't even heard of it.
Yeah.
It's a renewable show. The Plus, it's become a battery show. And it was in Anaheim. The same hall that we have Apex in was
Yeah.
just the battery portion of that show. It was enormous. I just couldn't believe it. So
Neat.
this is evolving very rapidly.
Mm. Well, let's touch on that too, the battery issue. I mean, that's core to everything here, right? Is that ability, especially within the vehicles. Uh, and then there's the making of the batteries, the material required, all of that, right? Um, what are you seeing trends in that particular area?
So there's the chemistry and there's the actual manufacturing. So it's a bit complex, and that's why there's been so much noise about the Infrastructure Act and tariffs and what this is all about is China makes all the batteries pretty much. It's BYD, who's also the car maker, and CATL. Between these two guys, I forget what percentage, but I think it's close to 80+% of all the batteries in the world. Then you break it down. There's the mining, there's the refining, there's the actual building the batteries, and then there's the packs. And in each step, China dominates. And the one step that really gets overlooked in the conversation is the refining. So a lot of the chemistries that go into the batteries, only China can refine it. So as part of receiving government money, like you go buy an EV, there's a stipulation that if you're going to get federal funding, the battery has to be made in the United States, unless it's a trade partner like Korea. So LG is kind of exempt from that. But the reality, though, is that chemistry still is refined in China. And for us to get into, let's say, other markets to get into refining, that takes years, like a decade to set up the whole infrastructure to do that. So China, years ago, had the foresight to invest in this, and that's why they're in such a good position. So it's catch up for the rest of the world. All right, so that's just the battery manufacturing. Now, on the chemistry side, that's where it's really exciting because it continues to evolve. Your Teslas out there are cobalt containing. It's a lithium ion battery, but has cobalt. Terrific energy density, which means you get more miles per charge. But the new up and coming, well, there's a few actually. The new up and coming is what they call LFP. No cobalt, it's iron based. It is like half, if not half, maybe less, the cost of the cobalt containing. And cobalt is also mined from parts of the world that, not great, right? Labor issues and
Exactly.
child labor and that kind of stuff. So that's very exciting because that LFP, which it's the acronym, the LFP battery technology being so cheap, you know where it's going to wind up in? Battery energy storage. So it's going to make everything cheaper, not just the vehicles, but also the means for storing electricity from solar, wind, even so that RE Plus show I went to, a lot of it focused on home energy storage. This is what's in your garage, right? So it all works together as an ecosystem. And then there's another chemistry that's up and coming that's sodium based. Now it gets even cheaper. So, there's a lot of exciting stuff going on in battery technology in general. Again, China is kind of leading the world on this, but it's going to make this whole electrification revolution that we're going through more tenable because the costs are going to come down.
So those technologies, as you just mentioned, the LFP and the sodium-based one, are those China is still dominating those, or are those proliferating in other parts of the world as well?
So the manufacturing LFP, I think, is almost exclusively China right now. Again, the chemistries, the refining, and so forth. On the sodium side, I'm not on top of this. I mean, I don't spend my days looking at chemistry, but a lot of the noise I hear comes out of the big guys like CATL, BYD. But certainly there are other actors here in the United States, Europe, Japanese, all working on this. Because the thinking is, rather than try to beat them at what's today, let's leapfrog and get into the next technology because, it's not like a big catch up anymore. It's new for everyone.
Right. No, that makes sense. So You say you don't spend your time on chemistry, but I'm asking you because you work for a solder company, right? So on
Yeah.
Indium, are there within everything we're talking about, the different, whether it be the vehicles, the infrastructure, what are there different standards based on, for, say, vehicles versus the infrastructure? How does that play out, and what is Indium doing?
Good question. So standards like of quality, reliability, that kind of thing. Automotive is automotive, right? So they've got a set of standards, a methodology of manufacturing that, of course, a lot of the technologies are new for them. So we're working that out, and we're doing a lot of work, for example, with IPC on those standards for electrification. But what I find very disappointing is on the infrastructure side. It's because it's not automotive, and how a lot of manufacturers are actually building the electronics that go into these DC fast chargers, level 2. Like I've said before, I think in a prior interview, is kind of to class 2 standards, which is the same as your microwave oven. So, you're taking a box, putting it over the electronics, and putting it at a seaside resort and hoping for the best. Not using things like maybe conformal coated, or, I
Mhm.
had an interview just last week. This is part of my IPC group that's focused on charging within e-mobility. And we had the CEO of Charge Help on the interview to just educate us, what goes wrong. And one of the things she said, yeah, she goes, some chargers that we were working on, literally the sprinkler system was hitting it every day. I mean,
Oh my
I mean, you think about how gas pumps are deployed. It's like in the world of EVs, and they're put yes, it's good they're put in like those convenient locations,
God. Right,
but the thinking is not there yet. Like, well, it's okay if the irrigation is running on an electrified high
yeah.
voltage box.
Yeah.
What could
Hey,
go wrong?
you mentioned the IPC groups. Talk about that. Is that, I mean, that's because of the changes and what's been going on. How's that evolving?
Well, so there's a group that formed. It's called the E-Mobility Quality and Reliability Council, or EVQR for short. That it's folks like myself, suppliers. We've got tier ones. We've got EMS. The stakeholders, that even OEMs, the stakeholders that are involved and building this all out. And the basic premise is, we know and we recognize that today's standards, and we're talking about IPC standards, are not always up to where they need to be for some of these new technologies. Let me give you an example. High voltage. Now, high voltage is nothing new, but for our industry, it kind of is. Printed circuit boards. And a lot of high voltage, because of electrification, is winding up on printed circuit boards in one fashion or another. And the standards that we currently have in place kind of drop off at about, I think we said around 60 volts. Well, these DC fast chargers and EVs are running at 800, 1,000 volts. And some of the things that we're tackling, I'm not on conformal coating or potting or anything like that. I'm on soldering, but there's very little known about what happens to these materials at high voltage. So we're figuring that out. And what we're doing is a group is sharing that information. Even though it may not be a standard, what do we know? What can we learn from this? Because the technology is moving so fast. We recognize the standards may never catch up, or will always be a little bit behind.
Yeah.
But to proceed, or to continue to innovate, we do need to share knowledge. So it's kind of a common agreement amongst competitors. It's better to just share. So even IPC is working with other organizations, like in Europe, for example, and just, hey, let's not try to do the same thing.
Yeah.
You work on this aspect, we'll work on this, and let's share the information, which I think is terrific.
No, that's
Collaboration is key. Yep.
no, absolutely, especially with it changing so quickly. So, and as I say that, I think that, it's been a while since I spoke to you, and it's just all the changes that have happened just within, I think, the past year or whatever it's been. It's mind-boggling. There's just this industry, EV and the infrastructure is just but I keep thinking too that there was a talk about the EMS growth, that EVs would be that major driver moving forward. And, I'd be curious in the next year to see how that's actually playing out. Is it still, I think there was high expectations. It's probably tapered a bit with a lot of the news we talked about at the beginning here. So I'm wondering how the EMS are feeling about that industry now.
Without naming names, I was fortunate enough to be invited to one of the EMS's big supplier summits. They literally have over 10,000 suppliers, and we were kind of a small group amongst many suppliers that got invited to this. And they made a statement, or actually, it was interesting. They did a poll. They did a poll of all these other suppliers, and I'm talking, these are all big players in the room, from components, soldering materials, you name it. And they did a poll, and they looked at all the different verticals, from aerospace, medical, EV, automotive, iCloud, AI kind of, infrastructure, so on and so forth, and asked, pick two. What two verticals do you see the most growth? And it was like 50. You had to pick two. Everybody picked the same two: automotive electrification and AI cloud computing. So yes, to answer your question, and at least this EMS is saying, yes, this is where we're going to put our money. This is what we got to be focused on. And I think that's pretty consistent, because I see a lot of players in the EMS world in automotive in a big way. I mean, you travel down to Mexico, look at all the Chinese EMS that have come in. I mean, like overnight. They sprout up overnight, and these are like state-of-the-art facilities. So they realize, yes, this is where they're going to better profit than washing machines, for sure.
That's a good insight. Thank you. I appreciate that. And clearly, with 10,000 suppliers, that wasn't a small EMS. So right? Wasn't Joe Bob's EMS around the corner here. Before I let you go, there's so much going on in this industry. Let me just ask, if people wanted to learn more and do more, what are the shows? What are the big shows to kind of attend and see, or to learn more?
Well, you ask me this question now, and you ask me next year, I might have a different answer. But I will tell you right now, from the shows that I've gone to, CES is a must. And I've heard more than one automotive reporter state the following: it's the largest automotive show outside of China. It's like, wait, what? The Consumer Electronics Show is the largest automotive show outside of China. And the reason is because of all the technology that now goes into EVs and just automobiles in general, from ADAS to autopilot, all of that. So that's a great place to see what's going on from a technological standpoint. I also, I mentioned RE Plus, that's on the battery side. There's an infrastructure show, if that's what you're interested in, that's in Vegas. I can't remember the exact name, but infrastructure is in the name, but it has to do with charging. Okay. And those are kind of my big go-to right now.
Battery shows too? Are there specific ones, or?
There's one next week in Detroit. And actually, if any of the listeners, I don't know when you're releasing this, but we're going to be there exhibiting. So you'll find me sitting in the booth, walking around. But that show has actually gotten much bigger. They moved it out of, I think it was in Nova. Now it's over in downtown Detroit, because it's just gotten so big, and it's getting bigger.
Okay, good. We need to do this more often, Brian. There's too much happening in this space, and you're a wealth of information, and you provide a great service to the industry with all that you spend your days thinking and learning about. So thank you for the time. Thanks for doing this. And hopefully in the new year, we can catch up again and find the latest news.
All right. Sounds good, Eric.
Thank you very much.
I'm taking on your look here. If I had my glasses, we'd be
we kept this the same, didn't we? All good. Listen, have a good end to the year, and enjoy Detroit next week.
All right. Take care, Eric. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks.